Countdown to the US midterm elections. More than 30 million Americans have already cast ballots in a vote seen as a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency. So, in a divided electorate, what role will swing voters play, especially women? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rochelle Carey. It's the final stretch of the all-important 2018 U.S. midterm elections. Enthusiasm is high and voter turnout could reach record numbers. So far in early voting, more than 30 million Americans have cast their ballots. But it's one group of voters that's expected to play a crucial role, and that is female voters, particularly white women. Many are outraged by the way President Donald Trump speaks about women. And last month, that anger turned to rage after the nomination of Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, who was accused of sexual assault. Now, with all 435 seats in the House of Representatives up for grabs and 35 of the 100 Senate seats, the midterms will certainly shape the final 2 years of Trump's first term in office. Lots to discuss with our guests. First, White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett has this report.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
One day after Donald Trump was sworn in as president, hundreds of thousands of women gathered in cities across the United States to protest. Almost 2 years have passed, but the U.S. president has given them little reason to change their original judgment of a man many regard with revulsion. His behavior and language at times has hardened their views.
Vote them out!
After his aide, Omarosa Manigault-Newman, was ousted from the White House, Trump called her a crazed, crying lowlife and a dog. After Congresswoman Maxine Waters encouraged her supporters to harass Trump administration officials,
they're not going to be able to go to a restaurant. They're not going to be able to stop at a gas station.
Trump called Waters an extraordinarily low IQ person.
We won't go back!
But nothing has polarized the country more along gender lines than the hearings for Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Christine Blasey Ford accused Trump's nominee of sexual assault when they were in high school. Trump cast doubt about her testimony, mocking her recollection of the decades-old event.
How did you get home? I don't remember. How'd you get there? I don't remember. Where is the place? I don't remember. How many years ago was it? I don't know.
Trump's attacks on women are nothing new and have been dismissed by his supporters ever since the release of a video in 2016 threatened to derail his campaign.
Grab him by the
Trump shrugged off the controversy and won the White House. Even today, while a majority of U.S. women still disapprove of Trump, at least a third still solidly approve of Trump's presidency.
Everybody makes mistakes in their life. Nobody's perfect but God, and he's made his mistakes as everybody else who's human has.
I think he's a bully. I do. But I think you need someone like that in the office.
Conservative women point to Donald Trump's historically low unemployment numbers and a rise in wages while in office. They say his appointment of a female press secretary and a significant number of female-filled cabinet posts proves he's supportive of women in the workplace. Still, the battle for the female vote is intensifying. Republicans have released this 60-second advert aimed at winning over suburban college-educated women voters. Polling shows this demographic, more than most, is where conservative support is waning. But notably, Trump never appears in the advert. It's a signal even Republicans realize the president remains toxic to many voters. And in the fight to hang on for control of Congress, conservatives can't afford to lose a single female vote. Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
Let's introduce the panel. In Washington, D.C., Ashley Pratt, a board member for Republican Women for Progress. In Atlanta, Georgia, Kira Lerner, political reporter with Think Progress, covering voting and election rights. And in Birmingham in the UK, Scott Lucas, professor of political science and American studies at the University of Birmingham. Welcome to all of you. So let's just first, we'll get to the issue with female voters in a moment. First, the numbers so far seem to be quite impressive for early voting. Ashley, what do you think is driving that?
Oh, man, I think a lot of things. You know, a lot of people have asked me this question leading up to the elections. who is more motivated? Is it Republicans or is it Democrats? And I think it's honestly the Trump factor here on both sides. So you have the conservative base, which is obviously very fired up to protect their status in the House and Senate. And they think that this referendum on Trump's presidency just can't stand. Whereas Democrats, this has been a huge issue for them. They know that if they can retake power, they can have a referendum on Trump. And I think that that's a huge deal. So that is obviously a motivating factor for the Democratic base as well. But over 20 million people have already voted in early voting in states all across the country. And I think the thing that's fascinating there, too, that I'd like to point out is that women in particular are the ones that are leading this early voting. So in states like Georgia, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, over 53% of women have already voted. So that is a huge deal. And I do think that women will turn out in huge numbers on Election Day as well, just because of the rhetoric of this administration. So I think there's a lot of things that are firing up both sides of the electorate.
And we will definitely come back to the rhetoric. I'm glad you brought that up, Ashley. First, Kira, I want your thoughts as well. What do you think is driving these huge numbers?
Sure. I went to polling places here in Georgia on Friday, which was the last day of the early voting period, and people were wrapped around the building waiting to cast a ballot. And they told me that this does not feel like any other midterm that they've experienced in the past. There's way more at stake in this midterm. Here in Georgia, there's a candidate on the ballot for governor, Stacey Abrams, who stands to make history as the first Black woman governor in the country. And people in Georgia, I spoke with many women in line, are fired up and feel like so much is at stake here. And they, in Georgia alone, 2.1 million people have cast early ballots. And to put that in perspective, in the last midterm, only 2.6 million people total cast ballots,
Wow.
including on Election Day. So we're poised to see record turnouts here.
And Kira, I want to bring up, you pointed out the historic nature of Stacey Abrams running for this particular position, and how people feel something different. Is it a fair comparison to say that that's how some people felt about voting for Barack Obama, simply because it was a historic thing to do? Do you think that's a fair comparison?
It is. I have talked to voters in Georgia who say that they have not cast a ballot since Obama was running for president. So there's something about Stacey Abrams. Large part of it is the fact that she does stand to make history in the same way that Obama does. But people are also talking about her policies. Abrams would expand Medicaid here in Georgia, while Republican Brian Kemp wouldn't. And for women across the state, especially low-income women of color, that would make a huge difference in their lives. They're talking about Stacey Abrams' positions on public education. So it's not just the fact that she is a Black woman and would be the first. They're looking at this race holistically.
Scott, I want your insight as well on what is driving the huge turnout in early voting.
Oh, I agree with Ashley and Kira that it's a historic moment, the most important U.S. midterms in history. But I would go beyond saying it's a referendum on Donald Trump. I think Kira points out, for example, it's a referendum on other things. It's a referendum on rights for people of color. It's a referendum on education. It's a referendum on health care. It's a referendum on the economy. I think where Trump feeds into that is that probably unlike any other president in history, rather than trying to appeal for consensus in terms of the electoral tactics, he and his advisors are very much going for a politics of division, and that is us versus them. And that type of heated language, which I'm sure we'll discuss, they're hoping it will attract some women who will see some virtue in it. But of course, there's a lot of women who I think may be put off by that. And the question is, how many of them, along with how many young people, how many people from minorities, turn up not only in early voting, but next Tuesday to say, this isn't the way we want to go, the way that Donald Trump has portrayed America.
Ashley, you do represent Republican women. I mean, you're on the board of Republican Women for Progress. Do you agree with that assessment from Scott that Donald Trump and some of the Republicans are campaigning on division?
Yes, and I would like to bring that up here. So Republican Women for Progress have actually opened a PAC this year, and what we've decided to do is to support female candidates who are moderate Democrats who stand against Trump's rhetoric, and they're running against people who are basically rubber stamp Trump Republicans. So here, what we've decided to do is really take a stand against the rhetoric of this administration against women, one that we think has been very degrading toward women. Back in 2016, we took a stand against Trump and said, this is not symbolic of the Republican Party at all. He is not going to be our standard bearer. And we're a bunch of young women who say, no more, enough is enough, and this is wrong. And we're willing to put party aside for principle and to say, if there is a moderate Democrat out there who is a female who would be an awesome candidate, she should have the chance to go up against this. And she should know that some Republican women are behind her. I have traditionally voted Republican. I do not plan to in this midterm election. I actually registered as an independent after 2016 just because I was so disgusted by the future of the Republican Party. I do not think that it represents me as a young woman. I think that it has really strayed from its core values of limited government, freedom of speech, and they've really embraced a very, I think, extreme wing of the party and factionalized to the point of division. Words do matter.
Ashley,
this president just continues destructive rhetoric.
Let me ask you something about that, because I don't think a lot of people really understand how significant that is for someone to choose to vote for a candidate outside of their party. That's not a small thing. I think, sometimes Democrats I don't think they always appreciate how hard that can be to switch party lines. Was that a difficult decision for your group to take this position?
We had a lot of conversations about it, and we just decided we couldn't stand for what the Republican Party stood for anymore. And, while there are some Republicans that we do applaud here and there, Senator Flake, one of them, Lisa Murkowski, another one, for taking stands against the administration, most of them have been completely spineless. And we're just deciding that we want to have spines, and we want to remember this later on as a historic moment where Republican women did speak out and speak up and say that enough is enough. And we can't tolerate, as young women, this rhetoric to continue. We can't do this for our daughters. We can't do this for our sisters or for our friends. And when we hear things like on that tape, the Hollywood Access tape, which I thought would have brought down his candidacy, instead, there were a lot of people who embraced it as just locker room talk. And we all know that that is not okay. And when you're talking, again, about your daughters, your sisters, and your friends or your coworkers, you know that that type of rhetoric is not just something that is said in the locker room. That is something that is pervasive in our culture. And for our president to embrace that is a significant issue, which is why it ended up being a relatively easy decision for us to say, no more, enough is enough. Now, have people in the public and in the media been scrutinizing us for this decision? Of course. I mean, my Twitter is often lit up with people who just are saying the most offensive and degrading things, such as I shouldn't vote or I should get back in the kitchen. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I have to think at the end of the day that this is something that I can support and believe in.
Kira, she actually brought up the Access Hollywood tape, which even when Donald Trump was elected, he's continued that same type of language about women, that same type of rhetoric about women, as we saw in the story from Kimberly Halkett when the issue came up of Brett Kavanaugh. How have women, how has their support for him either gotten bigger or lessened as it's been clear that that's who he is when it comes to women?
I think the Access Hollywood tape was just the beginning of the last 2 years, which have had such a fundamental change in how women across this country view things like sexual harassment and sexual assault. We've seen in the last 2 years the Me Too movement burgeoning and women realizing that these things are not okay to speak about openly. And I think that movement is translating itself into politics. We have women across the country who are talking about issues like this. In Ohio, a woman, Rachel Crooks, is running for the state legislature. She was one of the women who was harassed by Trump. So I think women are realizing that they can fight back in the ballot box when it comes to their frustration and anger at these powerful men, thinking that they can get away with statements like Trump's. And I think we're going to see a lot of women like Ashley maybe flipping parties and voting for moderate Democrats or even progressive Democrats because this is such an important issue to them.
So what have we seen, Scott? So she talked about the ballot box, but it seems to also be driving more women to actually run for office as well.
Yes, but here I would be cautious, not be interested in the reactions from Ashley and Kira, and that is there are women who are running on both sides. Both Republicans and Democrats. Mm-hmm. And it's refreshing to hear Ashley talk about Republican Women for Progress, but there's also some women might think of Marsha Blackburn running for Senate in Tennessee, who are hardline Trump supporters. So it's a little bit of a diverse spread. And also, again, to put it back for their reaction, I know this personally from family and friends who are women who are diehard Trump supporters, who will come up with a standard of lines, which basically is, look at Hillary Clinton. Look, she was a very bad candidate. How could we vote for her? Or who will try to excuse Trump's behavior. And it still remains the fact that I get the perception there's a generational divide, that there's a lot of young women out there who are trending towards voting independent, considering candidates from both parties. But there are a lot of women, especially elderly women of my parents' generation, who still are all in with Trump no matter what he does.
So it's not just a generational divide. Let's get to the crux of this. There is a racial divide as well. When we say women, more often than not, we are talking about white women. White women supported Trump in 2016. It does seem that their support has lessened some, but we're still talking about white women because Black and brown women, their support for Trump is basically in the single digits. Ashley, what do you make of that?
Yeah, so I've struggled with this one quite a bit because in 2016, I had said frequently as an analyst and commentator that there was no way that women would be turning out for Trump, and I was very, very wrong. So I've been really careful going into this midterm election with the trends that I've been looking at and seeing when it comes to women, just because it seems to be right now that the momentum is on the side of the Democrats. But again, in 2016, women were almost the deciding factor in that Trump election, and they were the surprise factor there. I believe it was 53% of women voted for Donald Trump. So that number alone
53% of white women who voted for Donald Trump.
Right.
Exactly.
So when we break it down more into obviously demographics, that's where it gets tricky for me because I, as a white woman, as a young woman, I know that I should apparently be voting independent or more progressive. And I traditionally had fallen outside of that as a young Republican. But as this rhetoric has continued, and I've been talking with more of people who are like me, it seems as though it is going in the other direction. So just based upon that alone, I would say that this election will have an impact and will be different than in 2016, but that generational divide is certainly true. My home state of New Hampshire, a lot of the women there who are mothers who are older have said to me that it's all about the economy and that they can put aside this stuff that Trump is saying and doing, even though they don't find him to be a good role model for their kids because of his policies. And that to me is just wrong and hypocritical, because if you're going to go after Hillary Clinton and the Clinton family regarding the Monica Lewinsky stuff or anything related to nepotism, the same things are happening within the Trump administration. So it almost seems disingenuous that Republicans of an older generation, especially those older Republican females, are saying these things, because if they look more closely, what they'll realize is in 2020, these ads and these things that the president is saying and doing will be used against Republicans for generations to come. And you're either on the right or wrong side of history in that. And I think a lot of young women are recognizing that.
You talked about the economy, and the economy in the U.S. does seem to be doing well. But even having said that, Donald Trump actually isn't talking a whole lot about that. He's talking about a lot of other issues. There's actually a quote that I pulled from a story in the New York Times yesterday, and it was talking to white female voters. And this one woman said, he wants to protect this country, and he wants to keep it safe, and he wants to keep it free of invaders and the caravan and everything else that's going on. Obviously talking about the rhetoric that Donald Trump has been using about the migrants who are trying to make their way to the U.S. Kira, what is it about that message and those words that Donald Trump is trying to convey to voters specifically? Why do you think it's resonating with some white women?
Trump knows what his base wants to hear, and it's words like that about the caravan that are rallying up his base. These are people who voted for him in 2016 because of his rhetoric about illegal immigrants and building the wall. And he's just continuing on that same narrative. Whether or not the claims he's making are true, he seems to care less. But he knows that if he angers these white women and men about issues of immigration, that it'll drive them to the ballot box to compete with some of these Democrats who are turning out in record numbers. And I'll also note that Ashley was talking about the generational divide when it comes to white women. I think it's also important to realize that this is also a geographical divide. I'm in Atlanta right now, where in some of the suburbs around here, white women who either voted for Trump in 2016 or supported Hillary say that there's no way that they would vote for a Republican on any level of the ballot in this race. But in a few hours, I'm going to drive just an hour or two south to Macon, Georgia, where Trump is having a rally with Brian Kemp. And there are undoubtedly going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of white women there standing behind the president. So I think you have to look at the geographical divide across this country.
Scott Lucas, what are the difference in issues that a white female voter cares about as opposed to a female voter of color? Some things overlap, obviously, but those are two very distinct types of voters.
In a sense, I'd come back at that and say, look, what's actually more interesting is that the issues that are there actually should unite and shouldn't be a white versus black issue. When you talk about the key issue of health care, for example, when you talk about the issue of education, when you talk about the economy, in which, in fact, the Trump campaign is merely only continuing the progress under Obama and where it goes next year with the future of the tax cut and the federal debt, that's going to be huge. Those are issues which tend to unite. What I find more interesting is the way that the divisive language might play with different groups of women. And here I'd come back to immigration as possibly the key issue. And that is Trump and his advisors like Stephen Miller have obviously gambled that this is the one issue they can use to get a Republican victory. So does that issue of immigrants as invaders or immigrants as terrorists, which has been used in the past week, or Jews financing terrorists, do white women respond differently to that dog whistle politics than people of color? And will that make a difference next Tuesday? That's where I'd be looking at the dividing line, or one, in fact, which actually is mythical, and it's the uniting issues that'll be more important.
Well, I think that's a good way to wrap this up with this question I'm going to put to you, Ashley. I like what Scott is saying, is to focus on what are the uniting issues? Do you think that the candidates out there that can figure out the issues, that obviously that unite voters, clearly, but if they can get on what unites female voters, regardless of race, that they might be onto something?
They might be, but I feel maybe a little jaded by all of this, and I guess that's the sad reality of the situation. I'm going to point back to something that Senator Flake actually said when he decided that he was going to vote no in order to allow for there to be an investigation into the Kavanaugh kind of scandals that we were seeing, into the investigation piece. When he did that, he came out and said, had I not been up for, retirement and decided to walk away from politics, I wouldn't have been able to do that, because there is so much pressure on people that are Republican or Democrat on either side of the political spectrum once you're in office to hold the party line and to not step out of that line. So that's honestly the state of American politics now, where you can't even vote or do something in your conscience or do something that you believe is unifying or that will heal the country, because you know that you will not win your reelection bid. So I hope that that's the direction that American politics moves, but it scares me that that is the reality of the situation today, where people don't feel like they can vote outside of their party or do the right thing because they're afraid of the electoral consequences of that. But I think that more young people like myself are looking for more of a bipartisan solution to things when it comes to policy or when it comes to decisions that are being made and legislated, and hoping that people can work across the aisle, because that's what democracy is, and that is what American politics was meant to do. And it was designed to be a conversation among people that could represent all people, not just the base of each party.
Ashley, that was a pretty good unifying message. I think we can all understand why you're a little skeptical if we'll all get there at some point, but that was a really great unifying message, and I appreciate the conversation from all of you all, and we'll have to see what happens on Tuesday. Thank you so much, Ashley Pratt, joining us from Washington, D.C. with Republican Women for Congress, Kira Lerner in Atlanta, Georgia with Think Progress, and in Birmingham, not Birmingham, Alabama, Birmingham, UK, Scott Lucas, Professor of Political Science and American Studies. Thank you, all three, for the conversation. We appreciate it. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime if you go to our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Rochelle Carey, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.